Welcome to the Tapestry, where we talk about our life stories. I'm Dr. Francois Booker Drew, and I'm so excited to have my first show with a dear friend who is simply brilliant. And I hope that you enjoy this conversation and many others to come. And so I want to get started and introduce Cherie Banks. Cherie is the mastermind behind the moniker CEO Influencer. Her visionary leadership contributed to generating the first $1 billion for an international Fortune 500 company with consistent, successive results. She is an award winning global leader, international speaker, business inventor, and enterprise entrepreneur. She's a highly sought after industry expert for her business mastery, legal expertise, and strategic planning. This lady is brilliant and does everything. She is the founder and CEO to many successful companies with a multi-million dollar brand, including nonprofit organizations dedicated to providing educational resources, best practices, and ethics training for building business, wealth, and legacy. She's an award-winning lady with highlights in Forbes Middle East and a published author who's been featured on multiple platforms, online, and media outlets in print, digital, and broadcast around the world. And so I would love to introduce and welcome you, Cherie Banks, to the show. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited.
So Cherie, let's just dig in. You know what I do know about you as being a friend and watching you as a businesswoman, your faith is such a guiding force for what you do. Talk a bit about how your faith has been impacted and how you've been shaken to the core, because even with these amazing things you've had, you've also gone through a lot. Talk a bit about that.
Yes. Well, with regard to my faith, I have always, from as early as I can remember, I've always had conversations with God. I could always hear him speak to me, and I was very engaging with him as well. So it's more of an innate natural ability, which later grew into a gift. And what I discovered is that I have a prophetic gift. And it's been really amazing. And it's where there's a lot of revelation and wisdom and knowledge that I have this knowing and that I can see into the hearts of people. And so, what was interesting about my faith being most impacted was really at a time when my faith was the strongest. And I just believed that I was going to have a child. And I actually wanted 5 children when I grew up. And I came to a place where I wasn't able to conceive. And I tried for over 20 years. In the last 10 years, I resorted to IVF, in vitro fertilization. And I was told as I was approaching my 40s that it would be impossible for me to have children. And I just kept believing in God and reading his word and reading his promises where he says that, he'll give you the desires of your heart if you love him and live upright and according to his ways, in which I did. And yet I was faced with this time in my life. And when I was going through in vitro, I did manage to get pregnant, but I had multiple miscarriages because once I was able to get pregnant, my uterine lining wasn't thick enough to hold the child. And so I came to a place as I was approaching 40 that the doctor said, it's impossible, Cherie. It's just absolutely impossible for you to have a child. We're going to stop the procedures. And that you've been doing so much damage to your body hormonally, over all these years. And at that time, my faith was really shook. I questioned God. I think it was the very first time in my life that I really questioned him and who he was and why is this happening, especially when I was living, in the Word. And so that was a really difficult time in my life. And I turned 40 years old, and I decided that if I was going to have it out with God, that I would go to Italy to do it. Right. So I took a trip all by myself. I went to Italy, and I remember being high on a mountain and overlooking Tuscany. And I told God, you know what? I just broke down and I cried my heart out. And I said, God, if this is your will for my life, I will accept it. And you are still the great I am. I don't know why, but I'm going to trust it. And so I did, and had a wonderful trip, came back with new vision that I would adopt. And within the next year, I ended up conceiving naturally to a healthy baby boy, and God was faithful. And so I believe that that was really a testing season for me. And I'm here to say that, that's one of my greatest testimonies is the miracle that God has produced in my life.
And I think, Cherie, during this time that we're all faced with COVID, I think a lot of us are having questions about God, why? Why is this happening?
Yes.
And it is so challenging to our faith. What advice would you give to someone in the midst of a pandemic and seeing the racial injustice that we're seeing and all the challenges? How do you keep your faith going and yet still question God and not feel as if the two are a conflict?
Well, we have to really, it's not a conflict. And what I've learned is that we have to move with God and trust God. And what appears to be a conflict is really Him protecting us. And it's not that He's withholding anything or it's that there's a certain time for everything. And when we are going through difficult times, that is His blessing and His grace for us to stop and re examine ourselves, re examine where we are in the direction of where our lives are going. And it's kind of a happy check in, right? Are we happy here? And if we're not, what are some things internally that we can do? I just look at that as God using those obstacles to redirect us according to the destiny that He has for us. And there's always great opportunity in grave opposition. And we have to be able
Mm.
to see that.
And that can be so hard in the midst of dealing with trauma and dealing with tragedy and trying to figure out how do you move forward. But I love the idea of checking in, because I think so often we don't create spaces for reflection and being able to check in with ourselves so that we have perspective. How is reflection a part of your life? Because I know that that's something you spend a lot of time in reflecting and meditating. How have you woven that into your schedule along with all the other things that you do?
That has been a daily practice, and I will tell you, I wasn't very good at it early on. I think that I had a very traumatic childhood growing up, so I was always on the move, just trying to survive. And what I realized in that is I really had to become intentional about that self-reflection, and that's also in the word. Let a man examine himself. And so I took that time because I think often we don't get to where we're going that we want to go or the successes we want to have is because we really don't know who we are. We're
Mm.
operating out of what society is telling us, what maybe our family, our friends are guiding us, teachers, but really tapping into who you are. And so I have taken, daily time every morning, every evening, even throughout the day. In the midst of doing a brief or a report, I'll stop for 60 seconds to breathe and connect back with who I am, what do I love, why I am doing this, and does this fulfill me? And if so, then I continue to move forward. If not, then I know it's a time to then step away, step back, or change direction altogether.
You had given me some good advice, and it's something that resonates with me about paying attention to good activity and God activity. And sometimes we can become so busy in doing things that we don't create space or have space available for us to really receive the things that could come. Talk a bit about how you're able to distinguish between these wonderful opportunities that come your way and yet, say no. And I'm going to focus on doing these things, or being okay with having the space to wait on other opportunities. How do you do that? And how are you able to discern?
Well, for me, I think initially it was trial by error. I have been incredibly blessed to have a lot of really good opportunities. And what I found is when good opportunities presented themselves to me, I would take it because they're good. But what I found is that when I committed to that good opportunity, my time was then absolved by whatever that good was. And so when the great opportunity became and was offered to me, I could not take the great opportunity because I was too confined by the good. And I noticed that that was a continuous life cycle going on in my journey. And I thought, how come every time the great opportunity comes, I'm always boggled down, via contract or something that is holding me back? And what I realized is that patience is key. Discernment is key. Wisdom is key. And again, that goes back to really knowing yourself and knowing your value. And what I realized is that I had greater value than the good opportunity. My value was for great opportunity. And so I really did have to learn to say no. And that is a discipline and it's very challenging. But now I've come to a place where no is second nature. That's my default nature, if you will. And I think in that when saying no, that a lot of people are challenged. I know I certainly was, in not wanting to disappoint people, right? Because you
Yeah.
have a good nature in your heart and you don't want to disappoint people. And so what I had to learn was that the wording and the tone and the heart space in which you say no is really important. But once you're able to learn how to do that and master it, then people respect you and love you and they continue to want to work with you. And then what it does is it also inspires them to want to work with you for the great opportunities, not for the good opportunities.
But as you talk about that, I think about in your life, there is this common thread. There's several that I want you to talk about these themes that have shown up in your life, but there's a common thread of boundaries because you have done such a great job. I've watched you and you do such a great job of creating boundaries to have space for your business, boundaries for your family, boundaries for having the me time. I see you having boundaries to do your ministry work. When did you get that understanding of creating those boundaries? What was the aha moment of I've got to establish this in my life for me to be successful? And then we'll go back to talking about other themes that have shown up in your life too.
So the number one thing of when I said enough is enough is because I realized that I was giving my power away.
Mm,
I realized that there were times, many times, where I was taken advantage of because other people had different agendas, they had ill motives, and because I was good-hearted nature, I would always trust in the good of people. And when it didn't work out for whatever reason, then I was hurt, and I was like, "Wow, they really took advantage of me." But I had to. That was faulty thinking, right? Because
yeah.
it wasn't that they took advantage of me. It was I allowed them the power to do those actions. And so I realized that I had, some form of control with a whole lot of prayer, but that we do have control to a certain degree of who we let in, who we don't let in, what scenarios, or even events we'll attend. And so I said, I'm going to reclaim my power. And so I did. And I think the hardest thing, I started it off with school and business and community, but the most challenging area was with family because I had, my mother was mentally ill, and so it was a very complicated relationship, and so. You I wanted her in my life, but I also knew I had to set some really clear boundaries to save
Mm.
myself from that relationship, which was very toxic. And so once I really started working the relationship with her and creating those boundaries, then every other area of my life became so much easier because she was the most challenging relationship to be able to enforce that with. And when it happened and I was able and I was strong enough to do that, then every other area of my life just kind of fell into play. And it's something that I do naturally.